All right, we're live. This is episode one. You could say of just an experiment that I'm doing. I'm lucky to have a good friend of mine joining us today. Who I'll give him a chance to introduce himself. But quick lowdown. The idea of this live stream is really um, two things. One is to kind of just bring back dialogue, just having a conversation with another person. Maybe a discussion, maybe a debate at times. It kind of depends on where things go. But just bringing back dialogue and having a conversation about an interesting topic and uh, feeling willing to explore. And second is kind of around philosophical ideas and exploration. That's something that I've enjoyed doing for a long time. Um, this gentleman and I have known each other actually since high school, and we we uh, we would do this thing called symposium, which is just kind of uh, a tip of the hat to Plato and Socrates, basically where we would just get together and talk about philosophy, and that's what they would do, and back in the good old days. So today's topic actually is a very broad one, but interesting. There's a lot of different directions that it can go. It's basically fundamentally about what it real versus unreal. And before we kind of dive into that a little bit more deeply, um, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and your name.
Sure. Thanks, Alok, and thanks for having me on your live stream. I'm excited to have some dialogue, as you mentioned. So, for purposes of this evening's symposium, if we're going to call it that,
Sure.
I'm going by the name of Wraith. And as Alok mentioned, we've been friends forever since we were kids. Went to middle school together, high school. He's one of my best friends. uh, yeah, and I look forward to being here and having a good conversation.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Jay. Too, I forgot that I should have led with that. Appreciate you willing to take time just to try this out. Wherever it goes, however it ends up. I very much appreciate your willingness to just come on and explore um, a demonstration like this. So very much very thankful for that.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I know I did share some thoughts with prior, and like definitely with you and with any other guest kind of coming on. My goal isn't to blindside people. I want them to kind of have an idea of and think about things beforehand. So you did float the idea of real versus unreal, and specifically, one of my favorite entry points into that kind of conversation um, is and kind of a throwback to the movie The Matrix, which I thought was one of my favorite movies of all time. It's just it's so much I can say about it, but I mean, one of the things that it does incredibly well is weave in many of these different philosophical ideas. And one of my favorite scenes is where Morpheus is talking to Neo, and he tells Neo, have you ever had a dream you thought was real? What if you couldn't awaken from that dream? How would you know the difference between the real world and the dream world? And that's actually that seems kind of on the outside, okay, this is a sci-fi movie, like there's nothing really deep about, but I think there is. And one of the things I probably want to start with you is, have you ever had that experience, and do you feel like you have like a good answer to that kind of question?
So I'll start by saying that for me, at least at least most of the dreams that I can remember, I know that they're dreams.
Mm,
And I don't know how I know that. Um, and I don't know it for the entire dream, but
yeah.
there's usually a point in my dreams where I realize that I'm dreaming. And it's actually really fun for me because once I realize I'm dreaming, I can do whatever I want. And
Interesting.
it's like this, like, really cool freedom, um, where I know I'm dreaming. I know there are no consequences for anything I do. So I could, like, you know, I could like leap off something like incredibly high and have no consequences from doing that. I can run around and, just basically do whatever I want. You know how sometimes in dreams you have physical abilities that you don't have in real life.
Right.
I can take advantage of those. Maybe I can fly, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, and that's pretty cool. But that's not always the case. There are definitely times when in my dreams I don't know that they're dreams. And I have to say that for me, in those dreams, I don't there's nothing that immediately comes to mind that would allow me to discern that it's a dream.
Yeah.
Because I don't know it's a dream.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't recall. I haven't, even though I know exactly what you're talking about, the concept of lucid dreaming, where that's either at the from for the whole duration of the dream, or at some point in the dream you kind of recognize this is a dream, and therefore you know you're dreaming, and you can kind of, as you said, do take control. I haven't I've known about that concept for a long time, but I don't believe, or I can't remember having that experience. More often than not, I have the experience that what I'm seeing in a dream is exactly what's happening. And it is kind of like wild. There have been many mornings where I woke up and I was like, oh my God, thank God that was a dream and not real. Because yeah, I mean, dreams can be very strange and subjective, and yeah, it's crazy because we don't really even know why we dream. There's still, I think, a lot to be understood there. But what happens in dreams, it is a lot of times like very abstract or weird. Um,
Yeah, and I've definitely had those dreams as well where, and the worst for me is when I have a dream that I don't know is a dream, and it's a nightmare
yeah,
where, like, I'm genuinely terrified in my dream, and I wake up, and I know I'm awake. I know I've been dreaming, but I also know if I fall right back asleep, I'll go back into the dream.
yeah.
Does that ever happen to you?
I don't. So that's another thing. I don't think so. I don't think.
Hmm.
I don't. I know that some people have recurring dreams. Like they'll have the same dream over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I've had that, but I don't. They're not. They don't stick out in my mind. I don't have like something that I can immediately kind of recall and pull from my memory that says, okay, yeah, this I remember this totally, and that was a really
Yeah.
good thing. And the same, similar, like if I go back to sleep, I don't get the sense, or the that I'm going to go back to the place that I was. I
Mm.
often kind of I'll wake up and I'll kind of be disoriented, and I'll be like, oh, right, that was a dream. And then usually I don't have any thought about going back and worrying that I'm going to return to wherever that left off. So that it's interesting to hear the differences in our experiences.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is. It is.
but I am curious. One thing that I kind of felt, whether I implicitly knew I was dreaming or I didn't. I remember when I was kind of exploring this idea previously. One of the things that I thought about or brought up was the idea of control, and that in a dream world, I've often, when I didn't know it was a dream, there was a sense I often had that I lacked a certain degree of control that I had in waking reality. And I didn't, I haven't really explored that too deeply, because there are instances where when I'm dreaming and it's like either frightening or confusing, where I know that there's certain things that I can do in waking reality, and that for whatever reason I couldn't do that in my dream.
Absolutely.
But I don't know if I don't I don't think I don't think that's enough to say to refer to as a way of being able to tell whether right now I'm dreaming versus this is I'm awake.
I agree. I agree because when you're in the dream, you don't know that that's not happening for real in
Yeah,
reality.
yeah,
And I've had the same experience, and like for me, it's usually I'm trying to run away from something, and I'm incredibly slow for some reason,
yeah, right,
or I'm trying to fight something, and I'm incredibly weak.
right, right.
I can't, like I'll try to throw a punch and it will move in slow motion.
Yeah,
Basically, that type of thing. And if I were awake, I would be able to look at that and say that's not reality.
yeah,
But in the dream, unless it's a dream where I know I'm dreaming,
yeah,
which is most of the time for me, but not all the time. If I'm not in that I know I'm dreaming space, then I have no idea. Even though I'm physically behaving in a way that is not reality.
yeah. That's kind of where I feel like the control argument for me kind of breaks down, because it's almost as if in the dream reality it's a container. It's like the reality that's what's true in that reality, right? So
Right.
you might in waking reality you might believe, like you can throw a punch normal speed, but in the dream reality it's as if that's always been true,
Right.
so it's
Just
like
don't know. Yeah, you don't know any better.
exactly, yeah. And you don't the crazy thing is like you kind of have a sense of what real reality is, but you don't actually. I guess I'll speak for myself. I don't actually believe when I'm in that dream reality that that's something I can compare against. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does.
yeah,
It does make sense to me because you kind of know that your your punch isn't happening as it should happen, but you don't know that's because you're in a dream.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting because the one of the segues that I like, particularly with um, the dream versus waking, and it's kind of you're bringing up that point, because a lot of the information that we get, a lot, not all, but a great deal of it is just taken from our senses, right? So I think one of the things that's interesting to look at is, you know, how trustworthy is that? What do we how can we really believe what our five senses are telling us, and can they be trusted at all times, right? I mean, I think that's a big question, but I think it really does play a lot into what do we know is real and what is not real. So I'm curious your thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, I think that the senses often mislead us, and I think that one example where that really comes into focus is in witness testimony in lawsuits,
Yeah,
which is often just completely wrong.
yeah,
People don't remember the color of clothes that a perpetrator might have been wearing.
Right.
They don't remember who hit whom first. They don't remember, they don't really remember what somebody who did something looked like, or how tall they were, or I mean, they're how much time passed
Yeah.
or after something happened. It's just a common thing, and people are wrongly convicted, or wrongly not convicted all the time because of that.
So I, I think you bring up some really, really interesting things, because the thing you just introduced is the idea of memory.
Mm.
And that's got a lot in it also, right? Because it's one thing to perceive something, right? And you look at, like, an easy one is, you take you take a glass of water, right? And then you a clear glass of water, and you put like a pencil in it, and it looks like, when you look at it, at an angle, the pencil looks like it's bent, like there's a bend in it. And you pull it out, the water is straight, right?
Yeah.
It's just
Yep.
like rays refracting. There's ways of describing, like, explaining all of that, right? But to your naked eye, what you're actually seeing isn't the representation is wrong, right? It's showing you something that looks bent, but in reality, it's not, right? So that's one ways in which, like, a very direct way in which, like, your senses are not reliable. But then what you just said is also super interesting, but also relevant, because we rely on our memories a lot. We rely on it for everything. But as you just said, like, your memory isn't that reliable. And I feel like, what you would call it, the famous director of, what's the name of the director for Inception and Batman?
I know who you're talking. I'm horrible at this.
Anyway,
I,
he had another movie called Memento, which is
oh,
excellent.
Memento.
Yeah, do you remember that?
I thought Memento was Darren Aronofsky.
No, 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 no. Darren Aronofsky's also pretty awesome, but
Hmm.
Memento was done by same guy that did Inception. But basically,
Inception was awesome.
yeah, that's also another great movie. A lot of philosophical ideas in that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly the dream stuff. But basically, his whole thing is that memory is unreliable, right? You can't rely on your memory pretty much for anything,
Yeah,
because it will often tell you things that are wrong. But fundamentally, like, we rely on our memories all the time, and they turn out to be wrong.
sure. It reminds me of this. This happens to me sometimes when I get together with my extended family
Hmm.
and talk about, like, times like long past, and it's not uncommon for me to uh, combine two memories,
Yeah,
melt two memories into one.
yeah,
So, to think that, this event that took place happened at my cousin's wedding, when that event actually took place at my other cousin's christening or something.
right, right,
That happens to me all the time, um, and also to conflate a picture with a memory.
mm,
Or, yeah, I've seen a picture, and it's interesting. It's hard to know whether that's really what happened, because the memory feels so real. But, like, for instance, I have a picture of myself when I was like 3 years old, getting a soccer ball for Christmas, and in my mind, I to this day, I feel like I remember that happening.
okay,
I feel like I remember that happening. I feel like I remember being in my grandmother's house, and there was a soccer ball on the chair, and being like running over to get the soccer ball.
right,
There's a picture of that.
yeah.
So I was 3. There's a good chance I don't actually remember that.
But why do you doubt it though? Because of your age? Because generally people who are 3 years old don't really remember anything, or they.
Yeah, that's why. That's why. And because I'm aware of the phenomenon,
Yeah,
that people often conflate a memory with a picture they've seen, and that
yeah.
kind of becomes part of their memory.
Okay, so you're saying because you saw the picture, you created the memory in your head.
Yeah,
Uh, because generally 3 year olds they don't remember anything
exactly.
because they're at such a young age. But you probably filled in some gaps and made that picture real in your own mind.
Yep.
Yeah, that's okay. That's actually I've never heard that before. But I mean, uh, I can definitely see that. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's I guess I'm just curious because like with any like philosophical discussions, right? There's like there's the theoretical stuff, which is kind of what we're doing, but then there's the practical reality, right?
Hmm.
Like we kind of do know that, but how often do you how often does this kind of like present itself as like anything to you, or like do you ever kind of think about this outside of just like what we're doing right now, which is just kind of playing and exploring with the idea?
It might pop into my mind when I zone out at some point, or I'm on the subway. I'm not really thinking about anything. Yeah, it might pop into my mind,
Yeah.
um, just as anything might. Um, I mean, I'm sure you have the experience where
Uh-oh.
you like it's completely irrelevant to the moment you're in. Just you're just kind of zoned out.
Yeah.
Does that? I mean, I assume that does that happen
What
to
do you
you?
mean, like just daydream, or like just
Yeah, daydream exactly,
yeah.
but not necessarily. I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by daydream. Like thinking of something, having specific thoughts about the past, or you
Yeah.
know, or reality.
And then reconstructing it, or changing it.
Not changing it per se, but just kind of mentally reliving it.
Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, no, I do that all the time. I think what's interesting is that at different points in my life, because I'm a different person, I experience those memories differently.
Mm.
Like and that I mean that makes sense just at a like from a just a direct level. Because I'm a different person, I'm going to be thinking in a different way, and so this is getting more into interpretation and meaning, which is also relevant, to kind of this discussion. But um, if my values have changed, then my beliefs have changed, and if my beliefs have changed, the way like my lens of the world and how I make sense of everything is also going to change, right? Um,
Yeah,
and
that,
that's
that makes sense to me.
yeah, and I think that's probably a good thing. I mean, to the extent that you're the way that you're evolving as a person is progressive, right? If you're becoming a more mature person and you get more experience, and that actually experience is another thing that I want to talk about. Um, but if you gain more experiences and you kind of like you're able to make a deeper assessment of the world and of your own history, then yeah, I think that definitely is almost what I would say is like an expectation that should be happening. You should be remembering and thinking about things, hopefully in kind of an evolving way.
You
Uh,
know, I that does resonate with me, and it's interesting because I've experienced that differently as I've gotten older. Um, for most of my life, when I would think back to things I've done in the past,
yeah,
not all of them, right? Not all things, but for many of them, I think back in a way where, like you say, because I've changed a lot from that point, from that prior point in life. I look back on it with embarrassment.
Mm,
I look back on it as, you know, how stupid that was, or how foolish that was, or how immature that was.
yeah.
Um, but as I've gotten older, I've kind of I've stopped looking at it that way and just accepted the fact that, and actually um, having a kid has helped me with this, because I see the way kids behave, and
Yeah.
they behave like maniacs. They just can't help
They
it.
are, right?
They're maniacs. They're complete maniacs, and they don't. Their brain's not developed enough to like moderate in the way that adults moderate. And
Yeah.
so I'm a lot more forgiving of the way I acted when I was younger,
Yeah.
as an older person, and thank goodness, because it was not pleasant to look back on all these previous foolish things that I've done, which it's they're still foolish, but I forgive myself those actions now, because I realize that I just wasn't developed to the point that I am now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, like, I do that too. I think I'm a little harsher on myself. I think that's something I struggle with, is just like coming to terms with, okay, well, that's, but I'm getting more towards that, which is just to say that's who I was at that time.
Yep.
Those were the things that's the what knowledge was available to me, what tools or lack thereof was available to me, whatever. I acted and behaved in that way because that was, I quote unquote, the limit or the capacity that I had at that time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
oh boy.
Just spilled water all over myself.
Oh shit.
It's all right.
You can. It's okay. You
The
can
show must go on, Alok.
you serious? Jesus. I was worried something like that would happen. you're you're gonna continue in a puddle of water.
I'm tough as nails.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Right.
Um, it's okay. Do what you got to do. This is all part of it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
unexpected things happen. One thing I wanted to ask you, which is kind of a connected question, was the idea of experience. And I'm curious. Do you need to have to what degree? What's your belief or your stance on you need you need to have an experience in order to have real knowledge of whatever the thing is. So, for example, um, let's say jet skiing. You know everything there is about jet skiing. You've read it, like through and through. You know how important is it for you to have the experience of going on a jet ski to validate what you know about jet skiing?
I guess so. A question is, do you mean how important is it to me to like have have actually like felt it versus just knowing what it's like based on reading about it, or do you mean how important is it to have had the experience to like genuinely know how to do it?
Yeah, the latter. It's more about uh, on the theme of real versus unreal. Can you say that you know everything there is to know about jet skiing just by reading about it versus having the experience of it? How important is that, in your opinion?
So I think it's an interesting question, because I think it'll be interesting to think about how that applies to like different scenarios. But I think for something that involves physical movement, I think it's critical to have done it.
Why critic? Why? What's are you putting physical movement in like a special category, or if and if so,
Well,
are there like multiple categories, and like how would that work in terms of what we're talking about?
That's a good question. So there, I don't know if there are multiple categories. I'm thinking about physical movement right now, and so and now there are probably different categories of physical movement, because doing something that's incredibly simple, like I don't know, like touching my nose with my finger, is probably different than something like jet skiing.
Yeah.
Something more complex. Um, and I'm sure I'm not sure. I suspect because I haven't thought about it yet in detail. I suspect there are many categories probably that we could come up with. But I just know, based on my experience of having done things that involve relatively complex physical movement, it's not enough in my experience to simply have read about something or even watch somebody do it or even been instructed in detail how to do it versus actually doing it, because it's too difficult to interpret the words into physical action.
Hmm. Okay. Well, let's take that a step further. What if how let's hypothetically say I could put a VR headset on you or something, give you some kind of a contact lens, and simulate all the feelings of jet skiing versus actually doing it. Does that take us closer, or would it still be pretty much in the same category, of just like reading about it versus actually doing it?
I guess it depends on how good the VR is. Like, is it the VR where I'm getting
Let's say it's the best VR in the world.
so I'm getting visual sensation, but am I also on like an apparatus that's moving
Sure.
like a,
Let's hypothetically say yes. Everything is simulated to near perfection.
I think that would get pretty darn close, if not perfectly replicate the experience. Now, hypothetically, I don't know if that VR exists yet relative to jet skiing,
Yeah.
but I think that hypothetically, if you had an apparatus that exactly matched the movement of a jet ski in motion, and you had an apparatus that gave you, the exact visuals of what that would look like, and you had a fan that was blowing water on you in exactly the same way it would if you were jet skiing, and all of it, and wind, replicating the wind that would be hitting you, all of it. I think it'd be hard to. I think that would get you to a place where then you could step on a jet ski and do it. What do you
So,
think?
in other words, in your mind, you would say that okay, they are equivalent.
I would, man. I would, and it's a little bit scary because, who knows where the world is going right now with.
That's exactly what I'm asking you these questions, because yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, um, you're totally hitting the point, right? So the way where I'm going to take this next is based on what you're saying. It sounds like experience, the way that we experience the world, can really kind of be encapsulated in, um, just pure sensory experience, right? So to the extent that we're able to replicate all of those things, including the physics behind like everything in the feeling of the water and the wind and the smell and the
Yeah,
uh, all of that, um, then it really is just kind of coming down to all of this is really just feeding into your senses and your the way that your body is experiencing things, which then your mind responds to, right?
right, right. And if I think of examples, that exist today, it's not as advanced as what we're talking about right now, but they have those like wind tunnels that people. It's like simulated skydiving,
Yeah.
And people learn how to do things in that environment that they can actually do if they skydive.
Yeah.
Um, Another example is like training astronauts on weightlessness through the planes that fly really high and then
Sure.
dive.
Yeah.
That gives them the feeling that they have when they're weightless in space.
You always see those those things that NASA and like the Army do, where they're simulating the G forces, and those guys are like
Yeah,
taking those like deep breaths, and they've got a but it's basically simulating if they were in an ultrasonic moving jet fighter, what the experience of like those G forces would be like, preparing them for that. So
absolutely,
so yeah,
absolutely.
so here's the interesting direction, right? It's getting, and just as you said, in today's world, uh, we have a couple things kind of moving technologically in parallel. Well, like artificial intelligence is really just moving at like breakneck speed. Um, and then just like what we were talking about, if artificial intelligence is evolving and moving at that speed, so is our ability to create simulations, right? And to be able to
Absolutely.
mimic everything that's happening in the physical world. So, a couple interesting questions there. One, how do we know right now that we're not in a simulation? And two, hypothetically, if we weren't, but we were able to create one, is that something that you would opt into?
The second question is very interesting to me.
Okay, let's go with that. Let's
But
go with
but but I'll start with the first one. I'll start with the first one.
yeah,
I don't think one could know. I don't
yeah,
think one could know
right,
because if there were some society that was well advanced beyond ours, or society, or being, or God,
yeah.
whatever it is, um, that we're able to create a simulation that is so advanced that it's beyond our comprehension. I don't think there's any way we can tell.
Yeah, I agree.
Would
Um,
I opt into it?
yeah,
Uh, that's tough. So like
let's go there, Jay.
like come up with a scenario where it's paradise, right? It's like it's paradise. It's whatever my version of paradise is.
Yeah,
Um, would I opt into it if it meant leaving? So the answer, I think, first of all, I think it's impossible to make this judgment without it being real. I think it's impossible to like hypothetically conceptualize it,
why?
because it's I think it's very different hypothetically thinking about what you might do in a certain situation and being faced with that situation.
Of course, but I mean, I think that that's part of the exercise, right? Is that okay, let's assume all of these things are real for the sake of the exercise,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, I'm happy to do it for the sake of the exercise.
Yeah,
For the sake of the exercise, I would say no.
you would not.
I would not. And I would say no because I could not, in good conscience, leave the life that I have right now. I couldn't do it. Um, I couldn't leave family, friends. I couldn't do it.
Okay, but that's kind of okay. So it's a lot of it is like circumstantial. It's
Yeah,
you're basing your decision on other external circumstances, um, based on obligations and relationships and connections and duties and responsibilities, right?
that's right.
Okay. Um, I, okay, that's fine. But like hypothetically, let's say those were not a concern. To the extent that okay, your children are going to be fine. all that will be simulated in the simulation, right? It's not like you're leaving them. Everybody is going to go in the same way. You saw the Matrix, right?
Yeah,
Everybody's hooked up.
everybody's going.
Everybody's in. They're all inserted. Uh,
I think a better hypothetical scenario for me to be able to like make a clean judgment without external factors would be like, um, huh, it's tough actually. I was gonna say I'm stranded on a desert island, but like then of course I would take paradise.
Yeah, again, you're introducing a circumstance, right?
Right.
What
right.
I'm trying to get at is how do you decide? You want to make a decision around knowing with absolute certainty that you're going into a reality that's false versus the reality that is real.
Okay, so I'll just get intellectual about it and not think about any external factors.
I don't want to limit you, but
well, it's too hard for me to envision a yes if I consider external factors, but other than very negative external factors. But if I ignore external factors and consider a scenario where they don't exist, I would say yes.
Yeah,
I would say yes. I'll take paradise over torment.
Right.
And if it's a perfect simulation, have you seen the movie Vanilla Sky?
Yeah.
That's what this reminds me of a little bit, right? Where you people would kind of choose to go into like a paradise,
right?
Um, and and the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think realistically, I would say yes too, because particularly if I know that okay, yeah, like everything that I want is gonna be like just from a purely from a satisfaction perspective, right? Like everything, I'll be fine. Like everything will be taken care of. I'll have all the food, all the protection, all of the love, all of the all of that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing is, I don't think, just like in the Matrix, right? Like what they said, the first iteration of the Matrix, they made a paradise and it failed. And the reason why it failed is because people couldn't believe it. They couldn't accept it. There was something fishy about perfection, and everything being kind of right and proper.
That is very interesting to me, Alok, because I think it goes to how you define paradise. Like I I don't I wouldn't necessarily define paradise as um, lying on a beach all day and having my whims catered to and all of that, right? Like for me and I assume that with the same mind, if you go into a simulation, you're going to have the same or similar needs that you have in reality, which are for me like I need to be challenged and I need to work hard.
Yeah.
To feel satisfied.
Growth, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I think I do too. And yeah, it's a weird thing because the other angle to it is it's an easier choice if I know that I have guarantee some kind of assurance that the simulation reality I'm going into is in some way measurably better than the one I'm in right now. And part
Sorry,
of
say that again.
the I would be more likely to say yes to go into the simulation if I was given assurances that the simulated reality is in some measurable way better than
Yeah.
the reality that I'm in right now.
Right.
And I think the thing that I worry about is I'm not sure you can do that, because and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier, which is if things are moving too well, there's like something fishy about it, right? And there's, like you just said, if there isn't some kind of a challenge or, um, you know, hardship or obstacle, then yeah, I'm not happy with that. I don't have a sense that I'm growing.
Yeah.
Um, so, and then the other thing is like, we live, when you look at kind of the reality we're in right now, a big part of one school of thought will point to it being very dualistic, right? It's a binary. There's these kind of pairs of opposites, right? There's good and there's bad. There's justice and injustice. There's um, right and wrong, and obviously there's like a little bit of gray in between, but it's largely dictated by these two primary forces, right? And you
Yep.
see that in manifesting in all kinds of ways. So like you can't have one without the other. I don't kind of believe that. You can't have something in an absolute stand on its own, because then it loses definition,
Yeah.
right? If you go and you want to feel good all the time, what does that mean? It has to mean that there's a feeling of good gets its actual value in comparison to something else, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
without that comparison, without that opposing uh, property, there's no balance there, and things kind of lose meaning and value.
Yeah. I completely agree. And for me, like a small example of that is how awesome like the first and second days of vacation feel.
Yeah, right.
And then by like let's say it's a 2 week vacation.
Yeah,
Then by like the seventh day, it's just like,
yeah. You're ready for another
what am I
change.
doing? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, totally. Yeah, like I often will compare it to like eating too. Like
Hmm.
like if you're hungry and you eat pizza, you eat that first slice of, or the first bite of couple bites of pizza are awesome.
Yeah.
But then you get full, and
Yep.
it's like, yeah, eating more pizza actually isn't going to do anything in terms of your satisfaction. You're satiated. It's overflow. Your cup's going to overflow, and actually, you're going to get nothing out of that.
Yeah, and then you'll start to still eat it because it tastes good, and then then the self-loathing comes because you're just getting fat.
Yeah, yeah. So it quickly swings to the opposite direction, and then you gotta go jog a couple miles the next morning to get hungry again.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I mean, getting back to that point, for me, part of the reason why I might not enter a simulation is because I don't believe it's going to end up being different than what the reality is I'm in right now. At least maybe for a fixed period of time, but then it's going to it's going to collapse into the same thing. So what difference would it make if I entered into a simulation or not? My experience of the world is eventually going to plateau and flatline and become the same thing.
I think it depends, Alok. Like I think it depends on where one is like where one is in one's life. So if it, you know, if if you take somebody who is like socioeconomically stable, I think it's going to be a lot different than if you take somebody who's like below the poverty line and put them into a scenario where they're economically socioeconomically stable. For like, I think that that's something where, man, like the daily burden and stress of like not knowing how to pay the bills or where or be housed or get enough to eat, like not having that daily stressor, I think would be very meaningful. um, but yes, other than that, I think you're right.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. There's certain kind of cases where once you get to a certain point, like if you have certain needs that aren't fulfilled, basic ones, and
Yes.
get them. Yes, getting that's gonna obvious like I said, that's gonna have a tangible meaning, right? But
Yeah.
then eventually you're gonna kind of get back to a particular place. Um, and I think it's interesting because in today's world, like there is. Have you ever heard of the hedonic treadmill?
I have, but remind me.
It's basically kind of what we're just saying, which is, when you get like a level up in your life or in the way your the normal workings of your world, there's a moment where you have a feel like an elevated feeling, but then that feeling then readjusts itself and it flatlines, um, and it kind of comes back to where it was prior to whatever that update was, because basically you just get used to whatever is the new lifestyle.
Yep.
um, it's basically all it's kind of maybe it's not the exact same thing, but it's also kind of connected to lifestyle inflation, right? Where people start earning, they get more, and then they upgrade their lifestyle, and so they kind of have this never-ending sense that they don't have enough,
Yeah.
and they have to
Yep.
keep getting more.
Yep.
And the reason is because with every gain, like you're pushing this up, but then you're also pushing this up.
Yeah.
But then that means you have to push this up, but then you push this up. So you're always kind of you're trapping yourself in kind of a a loop of constantly wanting more and
Sure.
continuing to pursue that.
Sure.
Um, which is kind of a little off topic, but I mean it's kind of I just find that interesting, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. And it probably would translate over to a simulation. I don't see why it wouldn't.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, man, I think we kind of went like a lot of different places. But I am cognizant of time. We're almost. I don't want to keep you longer than is necessary. Um, but yeah, I'm just curious. Like like what are you what are you kind of what are you kind of coming away with? What are you feeling, or do you have any new insights or thoughts kind of around this conversation and the idea of real versus unreal?
So my first observation is that it's not often that I, it's never that I take an hour out of my day to have a conversation like this. So that was pretty cool.
Mm,
Just to think about stuff for an hour, uh, and not have it be like things I have to get done
yeah.
has been refreshing. So that was nice.
Huh.
Um, real versus real, real versus unreal. I guess my takeaway is that I'm surprised that we both so quickly got to simulation can basically mimic reality in a way that like you can't discern the difference, and and that for myself, I was I pretty quickly was like, yeah, like all else, like no external forces considered, like I'll take the simulation.
Yeah,
That's if that simulation is better than
current
that, yeah,
reality. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm kind of surprised I got there, and after talking through it more, um, it did make me rethink that a little bit.
What surprises you about that though? Were you like thinking, oh no, I would never do that, or
Not that I would never do that, but if I guess I would have thought that it would take a lot of hemming and hawing
yeah,
for me to get to make a determination like that, but it actually came pretty easily, and like sorry, I'll give one more example
yeah,
as
yeah, totally,
right. You've gone under anesthesia.
yeah.
The second before you go out, how good does that feel?
uh, it's interesting. I don't it I don't have a good. Sometimes it feels, I remember, and it feels great, right? Because you're kind of euphoric.
Exactly.
But most of the time, I'm just like,
Oh, you just go right out.
so it just happens. No, like I don't have a. I kind of like I get determined. Like, yeah, I'm gonna beat this. Like I always have that thought. Like I'm gonna
Right.
beat anesthesia,
Hmm.
and um, and I always think that yeah, these guys are telling me to, like to count, and like nothing's happening, and then the
Yeah,
next thing I'm just waking up in like a different room. But yeah,
exactly.
there are times where it feels amazing for sure.
Yeah, and so if the simulation could be euphoric, it'd be hard to say no to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but that's the thing. So euphoric forever for the whole time you're there.
I don't know. It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, euphoric for the whole time you're there, yes, but like, would you continue to be euphoric?
Would you continue to feel the
Right.
same level of euphoria if it lasted the entire time? So, for example, you and I could be euphoria right now,
Hmm.
but we've been there since birth,
Right.
and so it doesn't feel like anything to us. I mean, wouldn't that happen eventually?
I don't know. It's a great question. I mean, if it's a hyper advanced simulation, the simulation should be able to account for that and keep you in a constant state of euphoria.
But that so the literal words that you just said, a
Hmm.
constant state of euphoria, is
Hmm.
like an oxymoron to me.
So the conditions would change, but they would change in a way where one would always feel euphoric.
But then what's the baseline is euphoria.
Hmm.
So euphoria would then be something on top of that baseline.
Well, if euphoria, it's a great point because if euphoria just means like feeling really, really, really good, uh, there are different ways to feel really, really, really good. Um, but even if the ways of feeling really, really, really good were changing, right? Like would not having the absence of feeling really, really, really good allow you to continue to always feel really, really good?
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly.
Yeah.
For all we know, one change of feeling really really good to another feeling really really good gets interpreted as or reinterpreted, I should say, as pain and pleasure.
That's interesting.
Again, I'm getting back to duality, right? Like if you're feeling really, really good all the time, what does that actually mean? What's counterbalancing that?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. I guess we need some shittiness thrown in, sprinkled in there.
Right. On that note, we are officially at an hour. Uh, and yeah, I think just for posterity's sake, then close it out. I mean, I definitely, I'll connect with you kind of later to kind of talk through what the experience was like. But uh, yeah, any closing thoughts on your side?
I'm very pleased about how the shadow situation worked out.
Oh boy, yeah. The
Um,
one thing I I can't do is actually ridicule you the way that I normally do, which you're clearly taking advantage of.
oh yeah.
I can see that, but cool, cool,
Um,
cool.
no, no, this was really interesting. Oh look, I'm glad we did it. Fun thought experiment. Yeah, and I'd be up for doing more.
Awesome, thanks, man. Yeah, and once again, just appreciate you for taking the time out. I know it's not easy. Not to reveal any of your background, but yeah, I understand that your time is limited. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to come back for another session and another topic.
Sounds good.
All
Thanks,
right.
Alok. Have a good night.
You too. See you, man.
Bye.
Oh yeah. Okay. Stop cam. Wait a minute. End stream.